All right, guys. Thanks for coming, everyone, tonight. Holy cow. Nice turnout. It's going to get kind of warm in here. So yeah, this is our biggest meetup ever to date. We're closing in on our second year, and we almost hit 100 RSVPs. So congrats, and you guys are part of an awesome community. So a lot of new faces. So I'll just go through our normal spiel. We got our Wi-Fi up here on the whiteboard. If you guys want to connect, it's just Meetup, lowercase guest123. So yeah, I'll go through our normal. We announce our sponsors. We're going to do looking for hire, looking for work, and lightning talks, and then we'll get into the main presentation. So again, thanks for everyone for coming. So Virtuel sponsors the space. We've been at this. We started Angular MN here almost 2 years ago, and we've been here the entire time. It's starting to look like we're going to outgrow the space too. So thanks for everyone for coming. If the meetup does get too big, we've talked about moving out into this room or possibly even going to a new space. So I just want to do a quick show of hands. How many guys would still come if we moved to say Minneapolis or somewhere else in St. Paul? All right. That's what I like to see. Okay, good stuff. So SDG, that's our food and beer sponsor. We have one of their sponsors, Brett's in the back. Well-deserved applause. Thank you. Thank you. We were serving Domino's before they took us. Now we got Black Sheep. That was a nice upgrade. Great group of people. I've been working with them for about a year. Really cool. They totally understand relationships. They're not just money grabbing headhunters. So SDG is a great group of people. What else do we got? Hiring and looking for work. So we got a big group of people. Anyone out there looking for a job? All right. So if you guys want to, if you want to, you can get up and talk, or you can wait until we do the looking for hire and then go talk to them afterwards. So anyone want to get up and say their name and what they're looking for?
Easter too, we can leave our cards over by pizza.
Yeah, we have a couple of recruiters. So anyone, yeah, go ahead.
My name's Laura Crescent. I'm a student currently at Prime Digital Academy. Joel's actually my instructor. We learn mean stack, but I think I'm looking for front end. I like using Angular actually over jQuery. So
all right.
Let me know if you
know
anything.
If you're looking for a developer. Anyone else looking for work? Want to say something?
Sure.
Yeah,
My name is
Jim
Daniels. I just graduated from Prime Digital Academy as well, so
Congrats.
Stack as well. Looking for more front end things, I suppose. But I like learning. I like solving problems.
All right. Anyone else looking for work want to introduce himself? All right. How about looking for hire? Anyone need a developer? Anyone? I know two ladies in the back.
Yeah, so I'm Isabella. I work with Barbara Cap Technology. So I manage a team of full-time salaried consultants, and we've been doing a lot of hiring in the front-end space. A lot of Bennett Prime, we've met a few, a lot of faces I recognize here. Like I said, I'm going to leave my cards out. If anybody's interested in jumping into full-time consulting, I'd love to chat about you or chat with you. And then we have Sarah here too.
Hi, I'm Sarah. So nice to meet everybody. I heard a couple of front end people that are looking for front end. So I have a front end role open. It's a contract to hire, and then I have a couple Angular Node positions too, 2 junior level and a couple senior level. So I'll put my cards by the pizza too. If anybody's interested, feel free to reach out to us, and we can get you more details, some detailed job descriptions too. So, good.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, make sure you grab their cards on the way out. Good luck for your gig. We always do call for presenters. If you guys have a cool topic you want to come present on, we're always welcome looking for people to do full-on night talks, or even just a lightning talk if you want to just get up here and talk for a few minutes and share your ideas. Anyone else have an announcement that they'd like to make? Just general announcement? No? All right, cool. So with that said, we'll do lightning talks. If anyone wants to get up and show some code, we have HDMI or VGA connectors. You can just hook up your laptop. No? Jim's got a lightning talk. So
It's a show until.
Yeah, so after that, Jim's going to do our main presentation, which is getting started with Angular 2 and TypeScript. And then after he's done presenting, we do our raffle giveaway, where we give away JetBrains license, front-end masters, Pluralsight, and we have a virtual T-shirt that our marketing team gave us tonight.
What size?
Yeah, they have a drawer full instead of get one. So yeah, we'll stick around after the talk, and we'll do a raffle giveaway. And Jim, the floor is yours. Video switch for you.
All of it. There we go.
Back.
Okay. If you want to follow along the slides for the presentation, I posted the URL in the Meetup group. First, I'm going to do a like kind of lightning talk, show off a little project I've been working on. But if you do want to follow along the slides, just go in the Meetup group on meetup.com and check that out. You can follow along, or if you need the slides later, you can get them there. What I'm going to show for this lightning talk is a little project I've been working on called Commitizn. Commitizn is, whoa, maybe I should pull this up. Okay. Everyone see that? No, it's light.
Yep.
Okay. So Commitizn is a project that lets you format your commit messages in Git, so that later you can kind of go through those commit messages, pull things out, and put together like an automated change log of what you did. So if you put together 3 commits and you did a chore, you put a feature together, and then you also updated the docs, Commitizn will let you put information in your commit messages that kind of will be helpful later when you generate your change log. So the way this works, I'm just going to kind of go through. I have a little test project. So far, I've run npm init here, which generates a node project, and I've also run git init, and that just starts a Git repo. So let's say I make a change called, and I add a file called myfile.js. Okay, so now I have a file here called myfile.js, and then I have my package.json, which is used. It's a node package that I've created here. And so if I want to do a commit message, first I need to add my file to my Git repository. So I'm going to do git add period, just adds everything. So now if I do git status, you can see that I've got a couple changes lined up to be committed. I've got my file and I've got package.json. Well, if I'm using Commitizn, I can do something like this. I can write, instead of writing git commit and writing a message, you know, I made some changes. Instead of doing that, I'm going to run commitizin, which is just git cz. I have it installed already. I'll show you how to install commitizin, but basically you just do git cz. And it's, sorry, before you do this is why I do lightning talks and not real talks on this. First things first, you need to run you need to run init for commitizin on your project. So what this is doing is it's saying, I'm picking a specific way that I want to format my commit messages, right? Commitizin, you could write your own commitizin adapter that says, every time I create a new commit message, I want to pick a unicorn, and I have to pick the unicorn before I can make my commit message. But Angular has a commit convention that if you work in Angular source, you'll see them using chore, fix, feature in their commit messages. And so the kind of base adapter is called CZ conventional changelog. And conventional changelog is the name for that convention that they follow. So in order to get started, we're going to do commitizin init CZ conventional changelog. Gosh, I'm running out of screen real estate. Okay, and then I'm going to do save dev. What that's going to do is it's going to save this adapter to my package JSON so that anyone who comes to my project later and wants to commit, who also uses commitizin, will not have to do this step. So this is just me as the kind of owner of this project setting this up. So I'm going to write commitizin init, CZ conventional changelog, and then I'm going to save it. Okay, so it's initializing. It updated my my package JSON. So if I look at my package JSON, you can see that there's a config entry at the bottom here, and the config entry has commitizin and it has a path to the adapter that I selected. So in this case, I use CZ conventional changelog. So everything is set up, and now I can do the thing that I said I could do before, but lied. I can do git CZ. Hopefully it works. Okay, cool. So now I get this neat little list that says, what did you actually do in this commit? And for the sake of this, let's say this is a new feature because I created a new file. So I'm going to select feature. It's going to ask me what the scope of the change was. So like if you change some docs and you just change the README, you might put README. Or if you created a new feature that does something, you might say add widgets. I don't know. So let's just say that. Oops, sorry. Let's do this again. I lied again. Feature, and I said we would pick the scope. So let's say in this case it's widgets. And then for my short imperative tense description of the change, thank you Angular team for the specificity, I'm going to say create initial widgets. And here I'm going to provide a longer description, whatever. Now here I'm going to list any breaking changes or issues that were closed. So if you're working on GitHub, you can just say closes number 55, and then when you push this up to GitHub, it's actually going to go ahead and close issue number 55. And you can do closes 65 as well if it closes 2 issues. If you did something that is a serious breaking change, you can put breaking change in all caps and then description of the change, and it will bump the major version of your project. So if you're like, say you're on version 2.0 of your project, and you're making a breaking change, by putting breaking change in there like this, you're saying go to 3.0. I'm not going to do that for this change because it's just a feature, right? So let's say it closes these 2 issues and I hit enter. It just added those files. Now if I look at my git log, this is the message that it created. And you can see it follows a specific convention, right? In this case, it's CZ conventional changelog. But what's cool about this is because you use commitizin, you didn't need to know what the project owner decided they wanted their adapter to be. All you needed to know is that you use commitizin, and commitizin is going to follow whatever the product or the project owner wants. So in some cases, they might be using Bitbucket, they might be using something else. They want some different adapter, they can do that. And what's cool is that when you use this, you can combine it with a couple other tools, which I'll put links to in the Meetup description. But essentially what this will do is it'll run your tests if you have tests, and Then once everything successfully builds, it will actually, you can spit out a changelog that breaks it out by bug fixes, features, and it'll put links to the commit messages so people can look on your look at your changelog and actually get that. And that's done in an automated way. There's a tutorial that shows you exactly how to do this. It's by Kent C. Dodds. It's called creating a JavaScript library or something along those lines. And it's great. And Commitism is a part of that. So this is, yeah, that's all I have on that. Are there any questions about this? Yeah.
So the usage is more convention-based. It's not truly commit hook. Like, so you can still go around it with the commit message if you want.
Yes. This is meant to be an opt-in. So if you want to type out this every time, go crazy, do it. You don't need Commitism. But if you don't like doing this, or like you're like me, where you saw like I do this all the time, and I still put the wrong things in the field, and I can just Control-C and get out of my commit and go back to the beginning and start over. So for me, like, this is nice because in a lot of cases, I may want to enforce it, but there wasn't anything built yet that would like bring it to my desktop. Because a lot of times what would happen is I would put a commit message in there, but I'd forget a parenthesis, and then I'd go to do a pull request, and it would get denied, and they'd be like, oh, you didn't follow the convention. I'd be like, okay, great. So now I got to go redo that, and I have to do rebase or whatever. So that's what this project does.
On the prior screen.
Yeah,
sorry. On the prior screen, you had you mentioned that or the one before that, you mentioned there was a way to see what's in the content of this commit.
Yes.
And that would that be typed to the build so you could see a build manifest based off of that?
Well, so the way it works, there's a project called Semantic Release, which is basically will once your build finishes, you would put it after where you run your tests, and then Semantic Release looks at this convention, and then it assumes you got through your tests, so your build is ready to go, and it pushes back to GitHub. So that's how you get your changelog out of it. So you don't really get a manifest. It's not doing it off the manifest. It's actually going through the Git log directly because it links back to GitHub. So it can read right off GitHub. Yep.
Does Commitism provide any hooks to like monitor pull requests and see if like all of the Git logs in there are compliant with its standard?
It doesn't. There's a project that does though, so that's kind of why. Okay. In the live it's Kent C. Dodds. It's an Egghead.io free video called "Getting Started with Your First JavaScript Library," and in there he shows you how to set that up, and then he also shows you how to use. I think he shows you in there, but there's a project he created called Validate Commit MSG message, and that does exactly that. It runs the Git hooks. Yeah.
You use Commitism to generate your Commitism commits?
Yes, definitely. So meta. Yeah. Definitely. And there's several. You don't have to use it if you're not a JavaScript person, and you do need npm installed to use Commitism, I guess. But there are under the Commitism, there's I think two or three adapters. Yes, there's a Jira Smart Commit. So if you use Jira and you want to use the Smart Commit messages, you can use that adapter, or you can use CZ conventional changelog if you're using GitHub. And then there's also like a Ruby one someone created, and a company called Mapbox has like their own one. And it's really easy to create your own. So if you look at let's look at this one. So really, it's just you create an index.js. You export a function called prompter, and then we pass you Commitism and a callback called commit. And so this is the only thing you need to implement. As long as you implement this and return us a string in the callback, we will use that as the commit message. So you can see in here, here's the prompt, feature, fix, doc, styles, whatever. And this is just inquire.js if you're familiar with like Yeoman, generators, or pretty much any node project that uses a CLI prompt, they're using Inquirer under the hood, and that's what we do here. and then you'll get answers back. So this is where you can do things with answers. So like in my case, the Angular convention says you have to take all of the spaces off the beginning of the line. So I do that in here. But if your convention is different and you want to have a different convention, you can do that too. You might need to then figure out how you're going to get it to work with semantic release. Semantic release specifically works really well with the Angular convention. So that might be a little trickier. But if you're cool with this convention, it seems to work really well for me and for a lot of people. You can definitely roll your own. It's open source. Any other questions? Should we do some Angular stuff?
Cool. So we got a quick message real quick. So we have an overflow room set up. If you guys are feeling kind of warm or cramped in here, where it's playing the live stream on a 40-inch TV, and a little more room in there. So if you guys feel like cramped, you can head over.
Okay. Let's talk about Angular. This is Angular Meetup. So first of all, how many people here haven't used Angular at all? 1, 2, cool. Welcome then. You guys are ahead of the game because you don't have to unlearn Angular. So congratulations. You know more than the rest of us. How about TypeScript? How many people are using TypeScript now or have used it or are familiar? A couple if maybes, who knows? Okay, cool. What about Angular 1? Hands. Cool. I'm not going to cover how to go from Angular 1 to Angular 2. You're on your own. Thanks. So there's a couple projects that are out there and in the works. I'll try to link to those in the notes. Actually, I think I've already posted one in the meetup.com discussion about going from Angular 1 to Angular 2, but it's very much still in the works right now. They need Angular 2 to have like a finished API before they can go say, here's exactly how you go from Angular 1 to Angular 2, but it is on the roadmap because people really screamed loudly when they didn't have a roadmap. So they've listened. Angular 2 is created in TypeScript. So TypeScript is a Microsoft language that essentially is JavaScript, but with types. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. But it's been around for like 3 years-ish now, and it's created by the same guy who created C#. So he knows what he's doing, and it has really good support. It's open source. It's one of the great things Microsoft is doing right now, and they're actually writing a lot of software in it, so it's not going away anytime soon. And Google was so convinced by this that they gave up writing their own language that Angular 2 was originally written in to use TypeScript. So there's been some buy-off there. And Angular 2 itself is written in TypeScript, but you don't have to use TypeScript with it. You can just use ES6, which is kind of like the next version of JavaScript, if you want to think about it that way, or the current version. And you can also use original ECMAScript 5 if you really want to. What this is going to do is it's going to give you a little bit of, it's going to give you some extras that are going to be helpful, and we'll kind of talk about what that looks like. But I would encourage you to at least check out TypeScript. If you don't like it, that's cool. They're going to support all of those. First of all, thanks to the sponsors, and Joel, and who am I forgetting? Will and John, except Will's not here, so no, shame on him. Thank you, sponsors. It's a great turnout. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do a little intro into why Angular 2 was created and what the architecture you might kind of how do you think about like such a big change in a way that you can take away and kind of understand. We're gonna spend some time on TypeScript, and that'll be like syntax, specifically syntax, just so we can kind of understand what's happening when we look at Angular 2 code. And then we'll spend a fair amount of time with Angular 2, and then I'll leave some time for Q&A. We're not going to cover a lot of stuff. This is really meant to be like, you know nothing about Angular 2, even Angular. Let's just say you don't know anything about Angular. That's what this is meant to be. So we're not going to cover any advanced TypeScript features. There are a ton of them. We're not going to cover, like I said, Angular 1 to 2 migrations, animations, and the animations API is still very much being worked on. So far, it looks really cool. I'll put a link in the notes to there was a conference called Angular Connect that the new animations library was kind of like demoed at, and the animations look fantastic. But they're not really in Angular yet, so I can't actually demo them for you. Internationalization is also going to be something that Angular has built in, but it's not done yet. So you might say, well, what is done? It's alpha 45 right now, and alpha 45 could lead to beta. The Angular team was hoping to get Angular 2 out by the conference that happened 2 weeks ago. That was Angular Connect, which I mentioned, but they didn't think it was quite there, so they didn't release, and that's actually probably okay. There might be some more changes that happen. Hopefully the syntax I'm showing you stays kind of the same, but it is alpha software still, so it could change. And in fact, before my Open Source North talk, where I gave the same talk, they changed the API the night before the talk. I was already in bed, and so I had to get up and change my slides, and they didn't do it this time, but I'm thinking like the end of this week, they could release beta. So who knows what's gonna happen. But if you're about to write software in Angular, probably stick with Angular 1, but definitely follow some of the Angular 1 to Angular 2 migration guides so that you know how to write your Angular 1 apps so that they can easily transition to Angular 2. There's a lot of good information out there about that. There's specific ways where you can think about components in Angular 1, and we're going to talk a little bit about what components are. I'm not going to cover how you use services. If you're familiar with Angular 1, they're now called providers, which is confusing, right? Because they already had providers. So I don't know why they couldn't find another name, but just know that if you see providers, they mean classes that are just services that are injectable. Not going to cover form building. That's the only part of Angular where there's really two-way data binding. If you're familiar with Angular 1, two-way data binding is in Angular 2, but it's really just kind of a shortcut to help with form building. It's not so pervasive in the framework anymore, just for performance reasons. And also just for architecture. We're not going to talk about routing. There's a great talk by Brian Ford who wrote the router, so I would not want to cover that when he does such a great job, but I will link to that again in the notes. The router is pretty great and powerful, and it lets you do, if you're familiar with Angular 1 again, it lets you do transclusion in 2 different places or multiple places, which is one of the problems with Angular 1. So that's enough about Angular 1. Let's go back to 1996, right? Let's think about the web in 1996 where we were all just writing documents. We weren't writing applications, right? We couldn't even write this, in fact. We couldn't write this because that wasn't valid HTML. But now it would be valid HTML. We can write custom elements in nowadays. So let's just say we have a list of people. We have me, my wife, and my daughter is selected, right? And what I want to do, all I want to do in this scenario, which is a document, is is bold whoever is selected. So I've got a selected attribute, and I've said over here in my CSS that the font weight should be bold whenever I have a selected attribute. So this is great, right? There's the output. Annabelle is bolded. Fantastic. 1996 is the best. There we go. But now, fast forward, right? Let's take pets instead of people. Same scenario, but instead of selected, we're going to say we're going to change the text decoration of whichever pet is selected to underline. Now let's imagine for a second that we have this code, but we also have the other code in the page at the same time. So we've got selected attributes on 2 different lists because let's say they're widgets on the page, right? So I've got my pet list here, my people list here, and I'm using selected because that's how I want to write HTML. I want to be able to write selected as selected. I don't want to have to know whether or not I meant to underline or bold. I want to write an API that's easy to read for whoever's next. So in this case, what would happen? Shanti gets bolded and underlined. Right? These are my pets, by the way. I have a dog and 2 cats. Weird names. So Shanti gets bolded and underlined, and that's because we have the other CSS in the page. And I wasn't targeting this, but it has side effects for this list. So my API, I now have to change, right? I would have to write something like pet selected as a class and I would have to write people selected as a class, or I would have to find some other way to work around the language that isn't doing what I want it to do. So I've now had to change my application code because of the language's kind of deficiencies. So this is because CSS rules are global. We don't have encapsulation in CSS, except for maybe CSS modules, which is coming out. Not going to really talk about that, but the principles kind of follow. Angular 2 uses web components to encapsulate each component so that the side effects don't happen. So you can use selected in this component, and you can use selected in the other component, and you're not going to have this kind of cross side effect behavior. That's the last time I'm going to talk about web components in this talk, and it's a little confusing because web components is not the same as components in Angular 2, because of course they have to use the same language, right? Like there's not enough words to describe what we're talking about. So web components is this encapsulation. Components in Angular 2 are much more about the architecture and how do we architect our applications. So let's think about an application and how we would architect it. We've got a couple components: app, person, people list, and pet, right? And maybe because this is not an Angular 2 application, this is just an application, we say, okay, well, a person can do something inside of the application, a person can walk their pet, but a list of people, there might be events coming out, maybe the user clicks on a person in the list, and now I have kind of events flowing all over the place. And I have data going the other way. So maybe when I click the people list, the app gives me some new data. Maybe I refresh the data. But then maybe there's like cross side effects, right? Because I haven't architected my application in a way where the data and the events are all pointing one direction. Instead, I kind of have all these side effects. And it starts to get really hard to reason about. And if you worked in Angular 1 at all, you know what I'm talking about, because you can trigger an event and then you're kind of like, all right, there it is, do what you will. And finding side effects is really hard in this scenario. So it's kind of an infinite loop, right? Like you could trigger an event, which triggers an event, which triggers an event, which triggers your original event, and now your digest cycle is just like looping, and you just throw your hands up like you don't know what's happening, and you're drinking, frankly. What we could do to make this better is we could think about our application as a component tree where the output of a given component is just events. And those events might transport data, but the arrows all point the same way. So rather than having like this kind of glob and everything can point all over the place, we're gonna have events flowing out and we're gonna have data flowing in. So if we look at the person component on the left here, there's only going to be events flowing out of it and data flowing in from the person list. We're not going to have those arrows going the other way in any scenario. So what does this kind of mean? This is abstract. But what it gets at is all of the red arrows are pointing up, all the blue arrows are pointing down. And so like we're feeling pretty good, right? Like, yeah, we're good. People have like way too much time on their hands. I stole all of these. So how do we actually do this, right? Well, first we need to know something about TypeScript. Talked a little bit about TypeScript, but pretty much JavaScript with types is TypeScript. And that seems really straightforward, but what does that mean actually? Well, if you're familiar with Java, right? Java is a strongly typed language where if I create a variable, let's say the variable is name, and that variable is a string, I have to say that that variable is going to be a string before I use it. So I have to say this variable name is going to be a string Jim. In JavaScript, what I can do is I can say this variable is just a variable. I'm going to do something later with it, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. I might be an object. I might be a function. Who knows what I'm going to be? And this is great because it's super flexible. But it also can be confusing when you're working in large applications because you come and look at the code and you're like, wait a minute, so you use this as a string and then later you define it as an object, but then later you were like, nah, this is a function. And that's fine, you can do that. Which is cool, but again, it's really hard to work in large applications like this. So JavaScript is like weakly typed, right? Like it doesn't have types. It has primitives, which doesn't have types. It just has variables. And then Java is strictly typed, and TypeScript is somewhere in the middle. It's what's called duck typing or humble typing, where you don't have to add a type to something, but the more types you add, the more data you're going to get out of your IDE when you go and start typing a variable name. So if I've defined something as a string, but I haven't given it a value yet, and then later I type that that variable name equals something, it's going to say, hey, you need to make this a string. And if I try and make it an object, it's going to say, the compiler, the TypeScript compiler is going to say, no, you can't do that. You can't make a string an object. Like you can't do that. But you can say this could be anything and override the compiler. The downside of doing that, of course, is you're giving up all the benefits of TypeScript, and you're basically condemning the next person to come look at your code. So why use TypeScript? Well, we talked a little bit about this. Code for readability. When you pick up a file and it's got 30 functions, and you need to know what's going on in one of them, it's helpful to have those types. It also helps with refactoring, because if I go to make a change, the TypeScript compiler can tell me where the side effects of my changes have broken things, right? It's going to say, hey, you changed line 57, and that broke line 145, which you don't necessarily get out of JavaScript. We'll go through what this looks like, but you also get to use the new ES6 features in older browsers now. You can do the same thing if you're using Babel and Webpack, or there's any number of other options here, but it's one of the nice features. And then you get the IntelliSense that I was talking about. A lot of editors give you IntelliSense now, but they're firstly not very performant, and secondly, they may not give you that much information. And so TypeScript gets you this nice kind of information about what you might be dealing with. So in this case, there's a user service, excuse me, and the user service, when I hit the period after typing user service, it says, oh yeah, there's a method getOneById, which expects an ID, and then there's also like a user's property, so maybe you want to do something with that. Thank you, sponsors. So again, JavaScript, if you have JavaScript and you know JavaScript, you pretty much know TypeScript, because any valid JavaScript is also valid TypeScript. You might not get the benefits of the IDE, but you can literally take a JavaScript file, which is .js, rename it .ts, run it through the JavaScript compiler. It will spit out the exact same code you put in. It will not change your code. And so this is nice, because if you have a big project and you're like, oh man, how am I going to do this? You just rename all your files to .ts, and you've already started, right? You're starting to migrate your project. And then as you add types in, you can just kind of start getting that refactoring benefit, the refactoring benefits that you really want to get. So again, TypeScript compiles TypeScript to JavaScript, or it'll show you errors if they're like fatal errors that you're running into. And it also gives you the IDE the ability to say, hey, you tried to do something that really you shouldn't be doing. In those scenarios, in the cases where you try and do something you really shouldn't be doing, it will still compile. It just will tell you that you tried to do something. It will warn you, essentially. In the cases where you did something like you left a brace out where you have to have a brace, it will not rebuild. So it treats those like slightly differently, which is actually a good thing. So Annabelle's my daughter's name. I'm a new dad, so hello world sucks. Let's do hello Annabelle. Here's hello Annabelle in JavaScript. Hopefully this looks kind of familiar. We just have a variable name, Annabelle, console log, hello Annabelle, right? Here's TypeScript. You can spot the difference. There's just one. We're telling TypeScript that the variable Annabelle will be a string. So this is exactly what we talked about before. We're just saying that this variable should always be a string. If we tried to set the name to say we're working with a robot, and the robot's name is 125, and then we try and set it to 125, it will break unless we use the string 125, in which case that's okay. It's still JavaScript, so you still have to deal with strings. We can't get around that. But let's look at a little more advanced example. So this is ECMAScript 6 code, which is the next version of JavaScript, if you want to think about it. And one of the things you can do in ECMAScript 6 is you can use classes. So if you don't want to use classes, I understand. A lot of people like functions instead. Ultimately, what this does is it compiles it down to use functions. So this is something that will ultimately be a function. It's just sugar, pretty much, for the people that like to use classes. So this is a JavaScript class. This is nothing, no TypeScript in this. This is just ECMAScript 6. We have a class person with a constructor. So when we create a new person, we say new person and we pass a name. And then we have a greet method. And when we call the greet method, it's going to return my name is whatever. So in this case, it's Annabelle, right? It's going to spit out my name is Annabelle. It's pretty much the console or the hello Annabelle example we had before, but using a class. Here's the same thing in TypeScript. Pretty similar. First difference, we can have public and private. So if you've used Java, if you've used pretty much any language but JavaScript, you have public and private, and you can hide or show things but using public and private. Now this actually don't put passwords in here or anything like that, thinking that you can't get at this. This is just for the compiler to tell the compiler like no one should be accessing this stuff. Throw an error if they try to. It will still put it in your code. Like we said, if you try and do something that you shouldn't, it'll still export. It'll still put the code out there. So you know, you have to be a little bit careful about some of those things. But ultimately, it's great if you don't want people to access private variables or private methods for that matter. The second difference is in the parameter here, we're passing in a name, and this time we've said the name should be a string. So again, if someone tries to pass in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's going to error. And finally, and this is new, what we're seeing here, if you put a colon after a method name, what you're saying is this method must return something of this type. So in this case, greet returns a string, and so we're saying greet colon string because we're expecting it to return a string. And this is nice because if someone came in here and decided all of a sudden that greet was going to return an object, it would underline that and say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. You need to fix this. Everyone else who's using this method currently expects you to use an object.
Good question. Though. Would you think that what if you greet returns are two different objects in the ES6 method? You have one object, one string. So that's more flexible that way. Why would I want to use that?
Right. So the question is, why would I want to use this, which is arguably less flexible, right?
Yes.
If I could take both an object and a string. So you can. That's the answer is you can. You can actually, instead of using string, you can use the keyword any. Any essentially tells it like, I want to be flexible. So you still can do that. This is really just because in this case, we know we want it to be this. And ultimately, we want to be a good a citizen for our public API. So if it's a private API, it may not matter, like you might want the flexibility, but say it's a public API, you're creating a library, you're creating something else that a bunch of people use, and they're expecting for that string to be, for it to be a string, and then you all of a sudden say, no, that's not an object. You've broken that contract between their expectations and what you're outputting, and so you wanna just be conscious of that. It's
well,
not
it also depends on the state of the application too.
Yes.
Right? You want to flexible as well.
Right. You do. Yes. Totally. Yeah.
In addition to the any, you can also use a union type, which is you can say I can take a string or an int, but I can't take an object.
Right. Yes. You can do that. You can create your own. You can create your own types too. And there's all sorts of TypeScript is super powerful, and there are whole courses. There's a great course by Dan Wallin, and I think he has the creator of TypeScript on there. It's a Microsoft edX course. It's free, and it's really good. They do a great job of kind of getting you up to speed on TypeScript. I would highly recommend it.
Is one other question, is the return type required on that function call?
Is the return type string?
Yeah. Is that required?
Is it required? As in, if I try to just do return instead?
No, as if you tried to do it just like ES6, except in TypeScript.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, you don't have to.
Okay.
You can just leave it off. And that's the benefit. That's the kind of what they call humble or duck typing. you get the benefits of using types if you use them. If you don't use them, it's the same as JavaScript, right? Like,
So you can combine. You can.
Yeah. Yep, you can flip back and forth. So it's pretty neat. And that's, yeah.
Does TypeScript do type inference? So like if you assign a var, to a string, does it infer that that's a string?
Yes.
Enforce that?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It does. And there's ways to override that. So you can, there's some config settings. So you can say, I specifically am deciding to require explicit definitions, but I think the default is that it doesn't infer this. So.
Is the constructor body no longer required then in TypeScript?
Constructor body no longer required. Yes, this is, it's shorthand. It's just a shorthand syntax. Basically, you could also, I did it this way because it's easier to fit on a slide, frankly. But you could just as well have said name string, and then inside said this name equals string, and just have like a local variable in the constructor. So if you use constructors in any other language, you'll essentially pass in a local variable, and then you'll set this, whatever your property name is, equal to the local variable. In this case, we're just going around that by using public name string, but it literally is just so that we don't have to type as many characters. So it's totally up to you. You don't have to use that.
Is it public saying the constructor's public, or is the name?
No, what it's saying is that it will actually create a property called name on person. Okay. So it's a shorthand for creating the name property.
Gotcha.
So yes, this name is available outside of the constructor. Yeah.
One other one. If you have a explicit constructor defined like that, is the null constructor still in effect?
If you have this constructor, is the null constructor still in effect? I don't know.
Could I say person equal new person with that signature there without passing a string in?
No, you must pass a string.
Okay.
In this case, you could define. You can define these as optional though. If you put a question mark after name, it defines it as optional.
Okay, thank
you. So you can do that. Yep.
So when you refer to name outside of the class person, you just use name, whereas inside class person, it has to be this name?
Yes. And unless this is private, in which case you couldn't refer to it outside of the class.
If it was private, would you have to use this?
You couldn't refer to it at all outside of the class if it's private. If you're referring anything, so you can think about this as there's another line above the constructor, which is public name : string. And what you're saying is person has a property called name. So if I were to do a new person called Annabelle, and I do Annabelle.name, I would actually be able to access Annabelle's name directly from outside the class. But if I were to switch that to be private, then it would only be accessible inside the class using this. So this is, you will never use this outside of the class. I guess that's the best way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, I do have. If you said private name string, then that next statement, new person of Annabelle, would work, but the name only has private access.
Correct.
Okay.
Good. Any other questions? Yep.
Not that you necessarily want to use it, but does double equal still work if it's type enforcing in TypeScript?
So TypeScript, that's a good question. So that gets kind of into the guts of TypeScript. TypeScript is compile time. It's not going to do any runtime checking. So you'll still need to do runtime checks if that's important to you. And so you do double or triple equals, whatever you're looking for. There's a library out there. One of the Angular core team members released a library called, actually, I don't know what it's called, but I know his name, Victor Savkin. Okay, I don't know his name, but he's a super smart guy, so whatever. You'll be able to find him, Angular 2 Victor, right? That's all you need to Google search. And he created a library that essentially lets you do runtime checking by using TypeScript. So if you've defined a type, then you can decide that you specifically want to opt in to runtime checking for that type. But I think it's still kind of new, and it's an interesting idea though, right? But TypeScript itself doesn't do runtime checking. It leaves that up to you. Yeah. Any other questions on that? Okay, let's move on. Interfaces. TypeScript has interfaces. What is an interface? Well, it's essentially a contract, right? What we want to do when we're writing applications is we want to try and write to contracts as much as we can and not to a specific class. So what does that mean? Well, if I'm a person and I greet, then I am exhibiting the behavior of a greeter, or I'm exhibiting greetable behavior or something like that. And so if I'm using a greeter in some other scenario, I don't want to require that they're a person. Maybe I only care that they greet. A robot can greet me. A person can greet me. And if I'm asking for someone to greet me, I don't care if they're a person or a robot. Then all I want to do is say, give me a greeter. So interfaces is what lets us do this. So let's look at what this looks like. Here's a TypeScript person. This is the exact same thing we saw before, but instead we're going to use an interface. So here it is. There's our interface. Interface greets, and all we're saying here is that in order to implement this interface, you must, if you're a class, have a greet method that returns a string. Okay. So in this case, this is our same method pretty much. We're saying it implements greets. And that would be valid because it does have a greet method that returns a string. So TypeScript is not going to yell at us. And here it is with a robot. Oop. Maybe I guess I don't have highlighting. But the robot greets. And in this case, it does return MD80 as its call sign or whatever. So if I'm relying upon the greet interface, what I've done is made it so that if I decide that I want to add something else that greets later, I don't need to know whether it's a person or a robot. All I need to know is that it greets. And so you want to try and write your applications this way, because what it's going to do is in the future it's going to let you kind of extend those applications easier. And yeah.
Can you implement multiple interfaces on a given class?
Yes. You can do implements, greets, and flies, and whatever. Yeah, just do commas between them, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions on interfaces? There's a lot on interfaces in that edX talk. So if you're interested in this, I would definitely look at that. Let's talk about modules. So modules are something that ECMAScript 6 has. TypeScript also has. They used to have their own proprietary kind of module system. It was a little complicated, but now they're just using ECMAScript 6 syntax. So if you decide to use TypeScript modules, then you're also learning ECMAScript 6 modules, which is nice. So let's take an example, person.ts. This is just a file, right? Like a JavaScript file, but it's a TypeScript file. And in this, we have a person and our constructor and everything. Well, if I try and access greet from another file, the TypeScript compiler is going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm confused. And it's going to give you this error. It's going to say person is undefined, app.ts line, whatever, right? So what we're trying to do here is we're defining a new person, and then we're trying to call greet on the person in app.ts, different file. So why does it give us an error? Does anyone know?
Doesn't know what person is.
Doesn't know what person is. And this is different from JavaScript, right? At least it's different from non-strict JavaScript. There is a way to get JavaScript to perform this way, but let's assume for now that we're just using JavaScript as one big global space currently, and then in TypeScript we're going to use it in multiple files, and specifically those files are going to be walled off from each other. So like right now, if I add two script tags, they're in the same space, and actually I can call a function that's in one from the other, and it just works. But that's actually a bad thing, because if you end up with a bunch of files and you don't really know where everything is coming from, it's really hard to reason about what's coming in, and you get a lot of side effects. If you've worked with scripts where things aren't running, it's asynchronous, so things aren't running in the right order or whatever, you may have kind of run into this. But what TypeScript and ECMAScript 6 do is they wall these off, and then what they ask you to do is be explicit about your dependencies in the application. So if we import person from the file person, note this is just person.ts, but we've left off the extension, and it will assume you're using .ts. Then now I'm getting a different error, right? I'm getting person has no export person. And this is because even though I've imported it, person.ts hasn't defined what it wants to export. So I need to add that. I'm going to just add an export keyword onto the class. Now all of a sudden I've exported person and I can import it over here. So that's how modules work. TypeScript, super easy to install. Probably install Git if you don't have it. You definitely need it. Install Node 0.12 or greater. You can definitely go into Node 4 if you're feeling adventurous. And then just install TypeScript like this. npm install g TypeScript. You may want to install TSD 2. That's a second package. What that gets you is, let's say you're using jQuery in your application, or you're using some other library. TSD allows you to get the IDE support of TypeScript without actually having the source code written in TypeScript. So it's a community-driven project that allows you to get definitions so that you get that nice support in your IDEs. You may not want that; it's optional, but thought I'd throw it in there.
Would you use the code editor from Microsoft Visual Studio's thing?
Yes, I would. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, you're on.
You just made it.
Okay, so yeah, any of these code editors, there's probably ones I'm not putting on here that I don't know of, but I know for sure these all have plugins for it. There's one space here, Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio obviously has support for it too, but Visual Studio Code, interestingly enough, is written in TypeScript, so that's meta, and it's got great support for TypeScript. And I have been a JetBrains user, and I know they're a sponsor, so go JetBrains. But Visual Studio Code and TypeScript work really well together. So if and I actually write PHP in Visual Studio Code, which is really weird. So check it out. There's a pretty good support for all of these. Some of them are community driven. Microsoft actually writes the Sublime Text plugin, so that one is also really good. But I think JetBrains is the only one where they kind of have their own TypeScript thing going on. But they just released WebStorm 11. Thank you. 11 that has Angular 2 like initial support for syntax, and then it also has TypeScript 1.6 support. So yeah. So yeah, I don't know. If you use TypeScript, you'll be kicking penguins in no time. Yeah, you can use TypeScript on the command line. If you just want to quick convert a TypeScript file to a JavaScript file, you can just run a single command and it'll output a file. It has support in editors. It has great gulp and grunt plugins. They actually, the Angular 2 team uses Broccoli. So if you're one of those guys or girls that uses that crazy thing, you can use that. Webpack and System.js, there's some great support. And I have some example projects at the end of the talk on one of the slides that you can look at for whatever build pipeline you have. Okay. Whew. Is anyone hot? Okay. Yeah. All right. Angular 2 equals components. Yeah, I mean, it really does. It's pretty much, this is like, okay. So Angular 2, if this is like the one thing you take away from this, it's think about your application in terms of components. Even if you have a Angular 1 application, you're like, I can't touch Angular 2. Yeah. Think about your Angular 1 application in terms of components, in terms of that architecture where you have data, and that data is flowing into a component, and you have events that are coming out of the component and up the tree. And start to think about your application as a tree of components, because that's going to help you in your transition, regardless of when you do it. So what does a component look like in Angular 2? Well, we start off with a class, right? We saw this class. We're exporting class person. And then we're going to do this kind of crazy thing with this @ sign. this is actually called an annotation, and it's something that is coming. You can use this not just in Angular 2. There's a couple other frameworks that use it as well. But essentially, what it is it's metadata about the class. So it isn't data that's contained in the class, but it is information that describes the class. So in this specific scenario, we're defining metadata, which is a component, and we're saying the selector for this component is person, right? And again, we're just importing the component from Angular 2. This is something you have to do because, again, we need to bring all our dependencies in explicitly. Otherwise, they won't be available to us. So we're just going to simply do that. And why do we need to define a selector? Well, if we want to use this component in another, I feel like I'm sliding over slowly. Can you see? Okay. If we want to use a component in another component, we need to be able to use it as an HTML tag. And in order to do that, we need to define a selector, which will give us an HTML tag that we can use. So in this case, we have person or people list, right? And that's going to correspond to the corresponding HTML tag. So a component will also have a template itself. So what this what this says is if I use a person tag and a person HTML tag, what is that going to get replaced with in my actual DOM, in my HTML? Like, what will it look like? Well, it's going to look like this. In this case, this person is really weird, only has hair and eyes. I don't know how. Yeah, it's kind of creepy. But in this scenario, you know, let's say they have a tag hair and tag eyes. These are just HTML tags right now, right? Like, they aren't components themselves. We can just use HTML tags in Angular 2. So this could be an H1, it could be an H2, it could be a span, it could be whatever HTML tag you want it to be, and it's not a component. In order to make it a component, we need to import those. We'll see it later, but they'll get imported at the top as components. Right now, we're just going to define a couple styles. So hair of 150 pixels. I don't know what that is. And round eyes. That actually makes sense for you CSS people. And what did we gain? I'm going to come back to the importing of those components. But let's just look at this real quick. We got explicit dependencies out of the deal, so we know exactly what we're using in this component. We have a very clear external API. This is like Angular 1 directives. Like, if you've seen Angular 1 directives, they're insane. The API for them is like @ star $, smiley, poop symbol. I don't even know. But we also get an internal structure that's very clear. It's composed of other components, potentially. Of course, here it's not components, but it's just elements. But we'll look at what composing with other components looks like. We get some styles. And we can apply those directly to our children. So in this case, we don't have child components, but we just have elements. Like if it was an H1 and I want it to be 50 pixels large, great, I can do that. And then we have a place to define internal functionality. So specifically, we'll look at what this looks like, but if we wanted to have a greet class or a greet method in here, we could do that. And then in our template or in our usage of this component, we can actually call those methods. So we get a really clear structure of what a component is. But wait, yeah, I said internal structure is composed of other components. So let's look at that. Okay, so we have hair and eyes. They're black and brown, but they're not components. So all we need to do is import the hair component and the eyes component from another file. This path I just made up, right? That's up to you. You can put these out, do whatever you like with the structure. And then the other thing we need to do is actually tell the component that it needs to use these directives. So in this case, we're going to say hair component and eyes component can be used by the person component. Now, what is directives? That's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm in bizarro Angular 1 world all of a sudden. Angular 2 actually has a concept of directives as well, but it's much more like a component is a type of directive. A directive may or may not have a template, so it might define behavior. It could define, you know, that I can click on something, or that something has a font that is extra large, right? That might be a directive. It doesn't necessarily have like a template, but it causes some side effect. A component is a specific type of directive that not only has side effects and has an internal API in the class, but it also has a view. And so it has an actual like template and styles, right? So where did these come from? These square brackets. All of a sudden, instead of having black and brown inside of the tag, I put those inside of an attribute. It's not actually an attribute, but it looks like an attribute. It's got square brackets. So what does this mean? Well, when we saw our structure and we looked at kind of the arrows going up and down and it looked jumbled, it kind of made sense, but like it didn't really mean anything. This is the blue arrows. This is the data coming into our components or going into our components. So what we're doing is we're saying the hair component and the eyes component should both be passed a string for their color. In the hair case, they're getting the string black, and in the eyes case, they're getting the string brown, and then they can do something with that. So maybe they set a CSS color, maybe they do something else, right? Yeah. Square HTML brackets is something only the Angular team could come up with. And we'll see a little more of that, right? So here's, just to kind of review, here's our square brackets corresponding to the blue arrows, right? That's data going into the hair and eyes from the person component. So look at what the red arrows look like too, right? They're user interaction. We said they're events. So if a user clicks on the eyes, maybe that blinks, okay, in our application. So we have not only do we have square brackets, we have round brackets too, parentheses, and parentheses correspond to the red arrows. So we say if you click on the eyes, then the person blinked. That's what this is. All we're saying is that you should then trigger the red arrow to send some data up to the parent component. And so yeah, interactions trigger events, and this is how components will get data from their children, right? The data, the blue arrows, is what's sending data down in, the events coming back up, and this is exactly how they're communicating. So again, red arrows, blinked, corresponds to the red arrow right there. So what do we actually do in the eyes component? Well, we need to say if either of the eyes was clicked, we're going to trigger the blink, and then we're going to send the color of that eye, right? Because maybe, okay, let's just say someone has two different colored eyes, and we want to know, if I'm the person component, I want to know what is the color of the eye that they clicked on. So this is how I would send that back up the chain. All I need to do is bind to click, and click is just click like you would have on any component. So you might have written on click before. That's this exact same thing. The Angular team has basically wrapped all of the native events that you might get. You might get key press, mouse down, any of these things. That's what that is, and you can just use it. You drop the on, and then you just use the event. And so, although blink is an event, click is also an event, but this time it's native. So essentially, you can use your events like they're native events. And so in this case, we'll get the color of the eye that they clicked coming out. Yeah. Just in review, components emit output events up to their parents. Events up, data down. Got it? And you can play with this today. It's like I said, it's alpha 45, beta maybe out this week, next week. I'm not exactly sure, but could very well be. This is a project. It's called NG2 Play, and it's written by one of the core members. He keeps it up to date, and these are the steps that you need to actually just have like an Angular app running. It's 4 steps, super easy. Yeah, thanks. Any Angular questions or just questions? Yeah.
What happened to scope? Where's our scope?
Do you really want it though?
Just a little bit.
You miss it?
Right.
They've been recommending to get rid of scope for a while. They want to use, VM equals this and then use
So the
VM dot.
components, we have our own scope now. How is that gonna work out?
The components have their own scope. So the way that this works, change detection in Angular 2 is so fast, and that's why we have scope, right? It's so fast that they actually, the Angular team was going to get this thing called Object Observe put into browsers so that they could observe things and do, like, instead of doing change, they could do change detection, but it'd be so much faster because it'd be in the browser. Well, they wrote this thing called zones, which essentially like hooks in. It's a in-browser thing. It's not in native browser code. It's actually just like a library. You could use it yourself. It's a JavaScript file, and it hooks into the way the browser's event loop works, and it speeds up change detection so much that they actually dropped the proposal for Object Observe. Like, they just said, we don't even need it. It's faster just to use this library they wrote that is just JavaScript. So the change detection is super fast, and there is not really a scope because you're thinking of it as in terms of a component tree. There is, I guess this is the closest thing I can think of as scope. We didn't talk about services because they're now providers. But if you're thinking about providers, you can inject a provider into a constructor, and that essentially is a service. So maybe I have a service, a provider, that goes out and talks to a web server, right? And my web server gives me back some data. Well, not only do I want to be able to call that web server from the person list level, but I also want to be able to access it from the specific one person level. You can set up how, like when you inject it, you can use one of the annotations to say how far you want that provider to go down into the tree. So you don't need to like inject your service at only the top level and then also at the child and then the child. You can kind of like set up how far you want it to trickle down, and that way, you get a little more control. It's not controller scope because controllers don't exist, but it's the closest thing that you can get to. And you can lazy load. Someone, I can't remember who, has worked on lazy loading of components. That's been a big thing that was really hard in Angular 1 is lazy loading components. And that has been worked on. So that would be really nice for like large applications where you don't just want to load the whole app, but you do want to still be able to load components later based on where the user's going. You can lazy load those. Okay. Other questions?
What does it look like when you're in the Chrome Dev Tools then? Because like we're used to clicking on finding your element and then looking at the scopes and looking up the scope tree to find the data. What does it look like to find your actual values, your data values?
Yeah, so you'll actually just see the so there's two answers to that. In terms of your templates, you'll just see the templates, exactly how you wrote them, but you'll see it assembled as a DOM. And so you won't see like all of the crazy Angular IDs and stuff. You just see your templates. So that part is nice because it's really easy to kind of grok like where am I in my tree. In terms of the development piece, there's a company called Wrangle.io. They sponsor a lot of the Angular events, and they're an Angular consultancy company specifically. They are sponsoring the DevTools, which is, I think there was one official one called Batarang. It needed some love, didn't get a lot of updates, and they decided to take it over and kind of champion that. So they're calling it, wait, no, it's called Batarang. They're calling it Batarangle, which is super cheesy, but whatever. They took it on, so good for them. And so they're working on that so that you can actually get at those data pieces. And there's some work being done to get, and in fact, I think there's some proof of concepts out there already to get like, if you're familiar with React, there's this notion of like hot loading. Basically, if I make a change to a component, I don't need to reload the whole application. I just need to reload the component tree that led up to that component change. There's some work being done there too. And those dev tools supposedly will also support that kind of thing where, maybe something got hot loaded after the fact, you'll still be able to get at your data. It's still in the works. It's open source though, so yeah.
Do you lose the natural templating with using this template within the components? So Angular, what I liked about it was the natural templating where you just pull it up in the browser and work on it.
So fill me in. How are you getting there? What do you mean by natural templating?
It's HTML.
Oh yes. So yeah, good question. I see what you're saying. So in these scenarios, I wanted to show you the HTML all in one page, but you can let's see if I can show you. Okay, so right here we're saying template. You can use template URL and then just say the file path and use an external file. I think the same goes for styles too.
And you can have those events and data brackets and parentheses in it.
Yes. Any other questions?
What is the deal with VM? What does that mean? Why do we think of it as VM?
You mean in terms of like Angular 1 and VM? View model. So it's what a view model is it's like a layer that lives between the view and the model. Right.
That's pretty good.
Hold on.
As long as it means something, that's fine.
It means something, yes. Although VM in like the browser, virtual machine. So you'll hear people talk about like the JavaScript virtual machine. Most of the browsers now will run their code in a virtual machine. So I don't know. Those are the two terms. But, yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Find me later.
Nice talk. Thanks. Oh, wow,
Yes. I tried to override the AC. I don't know. I think we're out of our control.
You can take that after. Okay.
My brother works there.
So before we do the raffle, just a quick note on the space, like we were talking about earlier. We're not set on moving out of here yet, but if you guys have worked for an employer in a building that might be willing to sponsor the space or just know a good place, please email it to us, either angularmen@gmail.com or through Meetup. All right, now we'll get to the raffle. So for those of you not familiar, this is our amazing Prizatron, built by one of our Angular Men members using Angular. And what it does is it hooks into the Meetup API and allows you to import the list of people that RSVP'd for the event. So we got the whole list of RSVPs here, and we're gonna pick, we can start just picking prize winners. And again, our giveaways, we have a JetBrains license. We have a list of all the different JetBrains tools right here that you can choose from. And we have 2 front-end masters licenses. Front-end masters is it's a really nice online learning site for front-end technology. Pluralsight is also an online learning site. We have a 1-month free sub card, and then we have a virtual t-shirt. So we'll get to the raffle. Where's my mouse? There it is. All right, first winner. Jade, are you here? All right, man, you get first choice. So what do you want? We got the JetBrains license, 2 front-end. We can choose one of the front-end masters. It's a year sub, by the way.
What did you say Pluralsight was?
Pluralsight, that's an online learning site for web tech.
Okay. I'll do the front-end masters one.
All right, come up afterwards and give me your email after we're done, and I can email that out to you. It's just a code that you redeem on the site. So we'll go to the next. Kamajari. I know I just followed his name. Are you here? Out here, maybe? No? All right. Shameless.
Put them on it.
If you are SCP and don't show up, you go on the shame list.
We hate to do it. Something we have to.
I think it was the guy in the next room.
What a supportive community. There we go. All right, next winner.
Yep.
Craig.
Craig.
What do you want?
Thinking about the virtual T-shirt, but now I'll take the plural site.
Okay, I have a card to give you. Come up to me afterwards. I'll make sure you get that before you leave. Next winner, Derek Johnson. Are you here? No? There, I don't see him.
Set an interview.
I had an interview in that suit. Nice suit, by the way. All right. Next winner, David Schmitz. Are you here? I really hate adding to this shame.
Gotta do what we gotta do.
We're gonna publish this one day on the website.
Build that next project. Yeah.
Yeah, President
Speaking of, we
2.0.
should touch base on that.
Okay, December meetup probably. All right, next winner. Trang Nguyen, are you here? No.
These are your people.
This is live, yeah. We copy and paste the event. Everybody's out here. If they're on the other room, they're watching the live stream. So
Yeah, they should be watching. Unfortunate. All right. Hey,
Josh, there you go.
Dude, all right. I'll do the JetBrains. You want the JetBrains? Yeah. All right, JetBrains has been claimed. So what do we got? One of. Whoops. Can't have what I'm doing here. So we got one left of these.
Just give me an email tonight. I get the two.
And now 0. So now we have one front end masters left in a virtual T-shirt.
Well, this is embarrassing.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
I can't hide. I have no shame. All right. Patrick, are you here? Out there? Patrick? No?
No. Oh, wow.
Well, they have that. Hang on.
Uh-oh, somebody doesn't have a license.
We need to bring them on as a sponsor, so. There's licenses over here. Come on. All right, next winner.
What am I getting?
You have your choice between front end masters and virtual T-shirt. Equal value.
Front end masters or original T-shirt? I already have no front end masters. I'll take the T-shirt.
All right, we have a large man. Congrats, man.
Thank you, guys.
Nice.
Excellent.
I've been sitting out the whole time. There you go.
That's nice. Can I put that on right now?
All right, last winner, Randy
Lewandowski.
Here.
There you go.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. That basically wraps it up.
Yep, if you want to, on your way out, if you're sitting in a yellow chair, to bring it into the kitchen.
Yep, yeah, always thanks. Let's go for a next
Prize winners,
meeting.
get out as soon as we know.
Stickers.
Stickers. Yeah.
Oh.
Good talk, man.
Thanks.
South Minneapolis, it's like an adventure. Get out of here. Yeah. Yeah. South Minneapolis, I think it's 66 feet over.
I had to get another shaming involved, so I had to bring the shame to you.
All right, I just told you.
Now we know.
It's nice to hear out loud.
Was like something that means
Lamb sounds nice, bean sounds nice, but yeah, I'm sure we come up with the next one. They're gonna have to shift the letters around. Digital Academy. My email is joel@primeacademy.org.
For the prize,
It was just for like 2 months. Email, like I said,
Yeah.
right on the way. Totally.
I need a photo.
That's what I need to do.
Whoa, dude, it got warm in here. Bathroom? That way.
And it's perfect, 'cause I got the front end master, and which is what I wanted actually.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a year sub, so it's really worth your while.
Really nice.
Mark Urbanski, who's a local guy, gets tons of national talent to do a lot of really good talks, both in-house and then online too. And I really appreciate the way they set up their online. You can see the presenter's screen, but also them presenting. They really set it up in a way that I'm able to follow really well. So
Yeah,
I dig watching their talks. Do they?
Yeah, they do.
I tried to override the AC, but it's all programmed up somewhere. There's no time to on there.
So, I help run the Microsoft SQL Server user group.
Nice.
We work at the Adana building, we give that to us. So they have a spread different rows.
Yeah.
I think the 3-room setup holds about 120, but I don't know if you guys want that count. We get about 70 to 90 in our room.
Yeah.
Generally the 2-room, we're fine with that. Okay. But if you get, I mean, since Microsoft's involved in a lot of this now,
Yeah.
they may be willing to sponsor it. No charge for the. So,
Oh yeah, well, definitely. If you can post some contact.
yeah, I'll
get
talk to our rep and see.
That would be way cool. We actually used to.
Yeah, so we have about.
Joshua at Gmail. I was like, were you?
I spelled my first name different. That's actually how it's spelled.
Okay.
2 H's in there, which is pretty unique.
I was gonna say you must have been like the second guy on Gmail who got Joshua at Gmail. It's like getting what's the Twitter's Jack Dorsey? Just got at Jack. I guess when you're the CEO, you are the early adopter.
There was someone like got their stolen, like.
Believe it?
Yeah, it was just like at H or something like that. Like they stole from it. Security reason.
Yeah, I'm sure. Somebody can change it.
They
Change your.
social engineered Twitter to give them access to the account.
I believe it. They just did that with the director of the CIA's AOL account. Comcast that got to it.
She's an all-time record in students and an all-time record in shame.
I think we broke some records. We broke some records last time. I think we broke them all again tonight.
Definitely broke the heat record for this room.
Yeah. We need to talk to them, see where I was looking in the closet, where we can override, even if we just kept the fan on, just keep the.
I'll bring a fan next time. I didn't realize I was going to get this on here.
It happens.
Gone.
I was gonna have a Sarah meetup.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, doing a hack night.
Keep you posted with how things are going with you.
Like last time we did a hack night, we have our Horizon rebuild.
Really happy you guys are our success story.
And,
We're talking about career days.
yeah, we already started.
Oh, you already
We did
started?
this just months ago. So all the improvements we get to
Hopefully we'll have time to
there. So
come down and
yeah, we
actually
would.
I signed up to do,
Thinking about doing that.
I did too, but to do mentoring.
Yeah, can
Yeah.
use another month, it'll be
Are you
just
gonna get a
before.
week off then after upselling gets done?
Something like that, yeah.
So they have 4 months left. They're just starting their group project.
Yeah, they're on
this last week of their first?
Keep watching Meetup.
Last week, the first one was last week.
So did
they're
this
on their
work
first
out
week
with
of
all the
project
people,
this week.
you know, and you
They
up
graduate
the,
20.
Yeah, I was wondering how many questions.
Yeah, the day
Well, there was
before.
4 or 5.
And then we'll have Thanksgiving, and then I'll have a week, and then Theta starts. Theta was just in there today for their.
I was sitting there just to see how.
So you're already
Only 5 or 6.
already double duty. You got pre-work for the new group.
It's a nice balance though, I think, with group projects and then doing pre-work for one, you kind of got your toes in both ponds, but you're
So
not,
yeah, you get more
you're not you don't have too much going on, whereas I think if you were doing like the first 6 weeks in class, both balance and pre-work, you would be too much to keep track of, but it's a good balance now. And having Christy back helps out a lot too, she's on vacation for 2 weeks.
You can see and hear really well.
She's back now.
You can't follow.
They don't split that up, so like you and Chrissy are like a teacher.
Really nice, but
Joseph
I think we kind of are, I don't think there's anything official, but Chris and I work really well together, so I think she's obviously involved in Theta, so they're carrying that over, but I don't know, there's been interest in mixing people up. I don't know, I'm getting eyeballed. There's been interest in doing cross-class instructor talks, but we haven't actually.
Yeah, that's what we were watching. Okay. Yeah, so we set up our, we have the YouTube Lives, which is basically just hangouts now.
Okay. Whatever the latest iteration is. Yeah, like I'm on. More people are using Hangouts now. I mean, they've all been there. But
yeah, so like
you can't interact with them very well.
This one right here. Right. No, it's basically just
it's one way.
So yeah, they do have a chat right there.
There's a little bit of lag there. Oh, so you cannot see anything on the screen. I almost want to picture pictures or something.
Yeah, like they do. That would be ideal.
Well, Google's going to have their developer days in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah.
And that's all going to be streamed.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, guys.
Sure. Where are these things? Those are actually locked. Ah.
Can't figure out what happened to the room now. Hey, Joel.
I didn't move it. It's right on the window.